So our third presentation today is Seth Maskett. What to say about Seth? Seth is a associate professor of political science and department chair at the University of Denver. His book, No Middle Ground, will be available for signing tonight. That's not a joke. They actually... The bookstore ordered copies. The bookstore did order copies of the book, and it will be available, as will books by two of our other presenters tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Seth.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for that kind introduction. I am honored to be among the finest political scientists you could get for this event. So I've been, for a few years now, I've been sort of working on a project looking at a topic that particularly interests me, which is the effectiveness of local campaign offices, particularly local presidential campaign field offices. And I've been trying to figure out, just what these things do. We know that increasingly the campaigns, and particularly the Obama campaign, has put a lot of energy into building these field offices all across the country. And so I was sort of curious, well, what sort of effect do these things have? Can we actually show that they make some sort of an impact on the election result? So I did a study on this in 2008. I'm essentially trying to repeat that analysis now and see what happened last year. So first of all, what exactly is a field office? What do they do? Here's a picture from inside an actual field office. That's a volunteer by the name of Neil Diamond, who showed up in a Los Angeles field office and made some calls for Barack Obama. And Obama won California, as far as I know, so I think they worked. We're done. And basically what happens is if you decide you have a few hours to kill on behalf of a campaign, you want to volunteer your time, what happens is you go into one of these field offices, and what they more or less are is a clearinghouse for volunteer activity. They try to put people to work in some organized way. So what they might have you do is making some phone calls to prospective voters. They'll give you a list. They'll give you some phone numbers. They might give you their voting history and give you a script of some things to say to them that might encourage them to vote. Conversely, they might send you out into your neighborhood, and they'll give you a walking list and a map and give you these people's voting history and tell you how many times they've been contacted and encourage you to tell them to make a plan for when they're going to vote and hear it from their mouth that they're going to vote. There's a lot of research which Sasha helpfully chronicled in his book, suggesting that this is actually one of the most effective forms of campaigning, actually having volunteers knock on someone's door and asking them to vote. Much more effective than having professionals do it, more effective than direct mailers, more effective than TV ads. But it's a very expensive form of campaigning. It requires a lot of volunteer time and involves a lot of training and organization, unlike just running one more ad. I had spoken a few years ago to one of the local directors for the Obama campaign, just to get a sense of why they were deploying these field offices. As he described it, he said you wanted as many of your local people carrying your message as possible, as opposed to paid field organizers or even imported volunteers from different parts of the country. The more offices we had, the easier it was to empower your local organizers and your local volunteers to be part of that effort. So there's just a sense here that involving volunteers in these offices is part of the overall campaign strategy. It helps sort of reinforce everything. Now, what literature we have on this topic, what does that suggest? Well, as we know, a lot of the literature on campaigns generally has a hard time finding many campaign effects at all, right? I mean, we know that campaign effects tend to be, fairly small, somewhat ephemeral, especially, and there's, some increasing suggestions that we've been hearing today, in re-election contests, where, voters already know something about one of the incumbents or the incumbent, and maybe not need the campaign influence as much. We know that also it tends to be hard to find some campaign effects because fairly often the campaigns are pretty well matched. Anything that one campaign does is usually countered by the other campaign. We know that the fundamentals, described as conditions of the economy, whether we're at war or peace, generally the conditions of the political environment over which the campaigns themselves have very little control, those tend to really trump most campaign effects. Those tend to really be the main determinants of whether a person votes or not or which way they vote, with campaigns kind of tinkering on the margins. Now, of course, campaigns, as Lynn Vavreck reminds us, may play somewhat of an indirect role in actually activating some of these issues. It can remind people why they should consider the economy or try and distract them from the economy if that's not going their candidate's way. So the study I did a few years ago looking at this particular aspect, field offices, found that there was a small effect. Basically, I looked at the county-level vote in a bunch of swing states and found that particularly in counties where Obama had a field office presence, he did slightly better than in the counties where he didn't. He did about 0.6 of a percentage point better. And I didn't find an effect for McCain offices. And if you actually aggregate this up to the state level, it looked like this was enough of a difference to actually flip the result in 3 states, Florida, Indiana, and North Carolina. Now, that wasn't enough to actually change the overall outcome of the election, but still, you can imagine how in a close election that's something that might matter quite a bit. Okay, so where were the offices this past year? All right, I want to show you this map using data that was generously provided by Lynn Vavreck and John Sides, showing the location of every field office from the presidential campaign last year. First of all, it's a very beautiful map, so let's just look at it for a little bit and soak it in and breathe deep. And so all the blue dots there represent Obama offices. The red dots represent Romney offices. Couple of messages we get from this. First of all, swing states. These are not evenly spaced across the United States. We see there's a lot of clustering in the more competitive states. Colorado is kind of rough. We thought that was bad. Iowa looking even rougher, but nowhere near as bad as Ohio. You didn't want to be anywhere near there. You also might notice a lot more blue than red. And this was one of the big takeaways last year, is that Obama just put a lot more into building field offices than Romney did. And you see this at a lot of different levels. So if we drill down into the state of Colorado, again, you see a lot more blue than red, mostly clustered in the Denver area. If we drill down into the Denver metro area, again, it's almost like the Obama fractal. Like any level of aggregation you look at, there's simply more blue. Here's a graph showing a bunch of the swing states, just the overall number of field offices there. And again, in every one of them, Obama has a lot more. In Virginia, Romney had, I think, 30 field offices. Obama had 62. In Colorado, Romney had about 20 offices. Obama had 61. In Ohio, Romney had about 40. Obama had 131. 131 field offices. Okay. Quite a few. Overall, nationwide, Obama had 786 offices in 449 counties. Romney had 284 offices in 218 counties. In every state except 2 of them, Obama's offices outnumbered Romney's offices. Missouri and Utah were the only exceptions there. Another way of looking at this, if you break it down into a table of counties with and without offices by each of the campaigns, well, one way to think of this is that, if you look at just the states or just the counties where Romney had offices, he had 187 in places where Obama already had offices, and he had 31 where there was no Obama office. A way of summarizing that is that most of Romney's offices were in places where Obama already was. Okay? Most of what Romney was doing there was being checked by Obama. Conversely, Obama had a lot of offices in places where Romney was not. So he had somewhat freer reign to have an unchecked message in those counties. Now, mostly what I've been talking about here is just simply dividing it up dichotomously. It's either the county either has an office or not. There are a number of counties where the campaigns had multiple offices. Based on the theory that, well, if one office is good, 2's even better, maybe 3's better than that. And you can kind of see how this is distributed. In the vast majority of counties where they had offices, they only put 1 there. But there were some where the campaigns had 2 or 3 or 4. I think the most Romney had was 5 offices in one county. Obama kind of blew that away. He had 13 field offices in one county. That would be Miami-Dade County, the home of Crockett and Tubbs, who I believe they split their vote in the November election. And one county actually with 21 field offices. That was Clark County, Nevada, home of Las Vegas. So there's some where there's simply a lot of offices. Okay, why? Why was there this huge advantage for Obama? The lesson coming out of 2008 seemed to be that Obama had sort of figured something out. He, again, back in 2008, totally overwhelmed McCain in the number of field offices, and there seemed to be this impression that, well, McCain simply is not doing this because they don't have the money. They were kind of broke. Obama had something like infinite money. And so the idea is that, okay, once the Republicans have the money, they will try and duplicate this. There was a quote from Representative Scott McInnes in Colorado who said, if you have the money, you can duplicate the model Obama's got. Interestingly enough, Romney basically had the money but didn't do it. Okay? He could have theoretically invested a lot of that money in building field offices but chose not to. Why? Some possible answers. One is that the two candidates simply had very different campaigning philosophies. Obama got his start, of course, as a community organizer, believed in sort of organizing things at the local level. Romney, more of a CEO perspective, believed he could get where he needed to get through advertising. It's possible these represent sort of long-standing partisan differences. Democrats have historically had more of a problem motivating turnout, getting their voters to turn out and vote, and perhaps they feel they need these field offices to kind of even the differences there. There's also some anecdotal evidence that Romney was outsourcing, in the sense that he was happy to let the RNC build local field offices, or the state party. He was happy to let evangelical groups, gun clubs do a lot of this local get-out-the-vote organizing. We don't have great records on this. We don't really know where these efforts were occurring, at least not to any great extent. But we do know that he was sort of letting some of this happen, whereas Obama obviously was much more interested in controlling this and organizing this at the level of the national campaign. So that's sort of an ongoing mystery. Okay. Moving on, okay, so given we know this advantage exists for Obama, what sort of evidence do we have that it actually made a difference? Okay. I've reproduced here a nice scatter plot from that John Sides produced for the Monkey Cage. And what this shows is basically the relationship between Obama's vote in 2008 and 2012. The horizontal axis is the 2008 vote for Obama at the state level. Vertical axis is Obama's vote margin in 2012 at the state level. Each of those data points represents a state. Now, not surprisingly, there's a pretty tight correlation between the two. I think the coefficient is something like 0.97 or something like that. But we would expect if the Obama campaign was simply so much more effective than the Romney campaign, the places where the campaign was present, the battleground states, should be above this line. Okay, we should see some sort of substantial improvement for Obama in those places where his incredible campaign was. We don't see it. The battleground states are right in line with all the other states. Okay, so it's hard to find much of a campaign effect there. What I did next is I reproduced essentially this exact same graph, only at the county level. Okay, so here's all 3,100 plus counties, and I've divided them up by color so that the red dots are counties that are in non-swing states, the blue dots are counties that are in swing states. You can actually see sort of a black line running through there. That's if a county is on that line, that means Obama did exactly as well there in 2012 as he did in 2008. And what you find is that, most of the counties are slightly below that line, reflecting the fact that, nationally Obama did about 3 points worse than he did 4 years earlier. But otherwise, you don't really see much of a difference. Okay, in the swing states versus the non-swing states, they seem to be lining up very closely there. It's hard to really distinguish that there's one area where Obama had a bigger advantage. Another way of dividing up the data is by whether Obama had an office there or not. So here's exact same data, only The red counties are places where Obama did not have a field office. The blue counties are places where he had one. And again, hard to really distinguish much of a campaign effect there. It looks like they're lined up just the same. Here's another way of showing the county level results. So here's a graph where the horizontal axis is Obama's share of the vote last year. So ranging from the most conservative counties on the left to the most liberal counties on the right. The vertical axis is the increase in the Democratic vote share between 2008 and 12. Of course, there was a slight decrease, so we see a lot of negative numbers there. But what we don't see is a sort of general rise in the middle there, where the most competitive counties were the places where Obama did the best. What you generally see is the more conservative counties, Obama did considerably worse than he did the previous time, and in the more liberal counties, he did better, which suggests that this isn't so much a swing state or a swing county story so much as it is a base mobilization story. This is a story of Obama doing considerably better in the more democratic areas of the country. Okay. Another way of looking at the results here, I've looked at the increase in the Democratic vote share, again, between 2008 and 12, based on simply whether Obama had a field office or not. And they look pretty similar, but what you do see is a slight increase on average, with Obama doing about 1.2 percentage points better than he did in places where he did not have a field office. Okay. If you look at the same data but divide it up by whether Romney had an office there or not, they look very close. Actually, the Democrats did slightly better, 0.8 points. That's in the wrong direction for Romney. That's not very comforting for him, obviously. So, we could use some statistical controls in here to figure out what was going on. And I wanted to show you the results of what happens when you look at multiple field offices in each county. So this is divided up by the number of offices per county and the increase in the Democratic vote share for Obama offices. And what you find is there actually is a general upward trend. Okay, the more offices you have, the more offices Obama has, the better he did. There's one case in the far right here. That's, again, Las Vegas. That sort of throws off the overall trend. But excluding that, everything is slightly upward, suggesting more offices were indeed better. So what I wanted to do from there is, the problem with this analysis so far is that it's fairly simplistic, and it's really hard to distinguish between a situation in which Obama did better in these counties because he had a field office there, and a situation in which Obama selected places to put his field offices because he thought he'd do better there. So what I wanted to do is just try to control for all of the aspects that would lead the campaign to put a field office in a county, to the extent possible. And this is based on a number of conversations with different campaign consultants about why they might target a particular county, usually based on demographics and voting history. So I put together a regression equation in which I'm trying to predict Obama's share of the two-party vote in 2012. The first predictor in there is Obama's vote share in 2008. Obviously, there's going to be a really strong correlation between those two. That's going to eat up a lot of the variance in this equation. Then I have variables measuring whether Obama had a field office there, whether Romney had a field office there, and I allow for an interaction between those two, whether both campaigns had a field office there. I include a whole host of demographic controls, race, the percentage of the county that's Latino, the percentage that's African American, the median age of the county, the median income, education levels, the percentage that were foreign born, the size of the county population-wise and population density. I also include shifts in unemployment. This turned out to be a really important predictor in the 2008 election. And it was nice to have some sort of an economic indicator in there. I run a fixed effects model in there, controlling for each state, so that in case there's different vote surge changes by state. And I run this model in two different ways. I wanted to do sort of a model that allowed for there to be multiple offices per county to see if there was an accumulative effect for a number of offices. And I also had a simple kind of dummy model. Either there was an office there or not. So I'll give you the nice ugly regression table here. That's obviously, don't worry about too much about all these numbers. But the main variable I wanted to look at here was, did Obama have a field office there or not? And I do have a significant coefficient there, 0.183 in the multi-office model. What that means is that for each office Obama established, he did about 0.2 of a percentage point better than he would have had he not had that office. Okay, not a huge impact, 0.2 of a point, but you can see if he had 2 offices there, that becomes 0.4 of a point, and so forth. If you just look at the office dummy model, that is sort of right on the borderline of statistical significance. It's actually like a p-value of 0.06. And it's roughly 0.3 of a percentage point. So if Obama had targeted a county, if he'd put any offices there at all, he did about 0.3 of a point better than if he did not have an office there. This is, by the way, to compare this to what I found in 2008, that coefficient was about 0.6 of a percentage point. This is about half that size. I did not find a statistically significant effect for Romney. I did not find any impact for the combination, the interaction of field offices. So one of the big takeaways there is that, yes, there is an effect, but it's somewhat smaller than it used to be. The coefficient in 2012 is about half of that of 2008. Why might this be the case? And this may end up being, I don't know, kind of the big topic for us for today, why these changes. Some of it is that the effects may be mitigated when an incumbent is running. We talked a little bit about this earlier. The idea that voters don't necessarily need the same amount of information. By October of last year, they already knew about as much about Obama as they were going to know and could render a decision about whether they liked him or not. They didn't really need the campaign to tell them much more. When before he was president, maybe they needed a little more information. It could have been that Romney was a little more effective at checking Obama's campaign. Okay, if you actually run a correlation in the locations of the offices, back in 2008, Obama and McCain's office locations correlated at about 0.45. Last year, Obama and Romney's office correlated at about 0.53. So there's a slight increase, suggesting that the offices were, in fact, somewhat better matched. Perhaps just Romney was a little bit better at blunting some of what Obama was doing. Finally, it might just be, and I think Scott was mentioning this in his talk, that perhaps what Obama was doing just wasn't all as cool as we tended to think it was. His dramatic achievements, his dramatic increases in campaign technology were not as dramatic between 2008 and 12 as they were prior to 2008. And partially, maybe that's an Obama story. Partially, it's just what was going on in terms of Democrats and technology. They began using the Democratic Party began using the voter activation network, the VAN system that just allows just mass digitized histories of voter behavior, and that was in 2005, 06, I believe. And the Obama campaign was really the first to take advantage of this new data in 2008. And that was really very different from how campaigns had been run before, and this really was a dramatic change. But then, as with all dramatic changes in politics, the system more or less adapts to it, and what he did in 2012 was maybe not that dramatic or new. Okay. How effective were these offices? I played with the numbers a little bit just to see where that office coefficient might be bigger. It turns out Obama's field offices seem to have a greater impact in counties that were poorer, counties that were whiter, counties that were less educated, and counties that were less populated, which is sort of sounding like your what's the matter with Kansas crowd, right? I mean, these are the bitter clingers to their guns and their religion. This is still very, very tentative stuff here, but I found it sort of interesting that that's where these seem to have more of an effect. To what extent did any of this matter? Okay, well, the only state that was really close enough for this to make a difference would be the state of Florida. Florida was by far the closest state in the presidential election. Obama won with just 50.44% of the two-party vote there. And just playing with these numbers, if you take the coefficient from the multi-field offices, equation, it looks like, if you take out the voters that were activated by the Obama field offices, if you assume those people hadn't actually voted, Obama actually loses the state. He wins only 49.97% of the vote, which I guess could be a win or a loss in Florida. It depends who's doing the counting. But and if you assume that those voters actually ended up voting for Romney, he gets only 49.5% of the two-party vote. So this is a place where it might have mattered. Okay, if not for all his overwhelming advantage in offices, it's possible that Romney wins Florida. Obviously, that doesn't change the overall national results, but still, Florida. So to sum up what we have here, I've got some evidence that the ground game mattered in 2012, but fairly modestly, and less so, about half of the effect that it had in 2008. We could probably conclude that Obama would have won anyway without this hugely disproportionate investment in field offices. Some mysteries that we still have that need to be dealt with. To what extent Romney actually was outsourcing this work? Was there a lot of activity going on outside his campaign that he was sort of coordinating with and sort of not? And whether these local offices or these local voter turnout efforts actually made a difference. That's hard to kind of figure out at this point. And also whether there really is some sort of parity across parties for these office efforts. Does each party equally able to take advantage of volunteer activities? Are they equally effective in trying to get their message out using this sort of things? Or does advertising maybe work better among some people than others? Either way, though, I think it's fair to say that, yes, all those billions and billions of dollars that were spent and all those volunteer hours that were invested, all the campaigning did matter. A very, very small amount, but it did matter. Thank you. Dr. Yeah.
John Sykes from George Washington. So, Seth, if I'm understanding these books correctly, and I better because I just said this on Twitter, the effect of the Obama field offices you find is in counties where there's no Romney. Like, that's what that interaction term means. So what you found, and I think you found in 2008 as well, is that when both candidates have a field office in a county, there's no real difference, no real favorability either way. But in counties where Obama was able to do this and Romney's not, that may be where the advantage is, and that may be enough to add up. So that's interesting because on the one hand, there's all this sort of anecdotal evidence that the Democrats are better at doing this. Let's talk more than anecdotal evidence. I mean, they're better at doing this. I saw anecdotal evidence from 2012 that you go into these Romney field offices / RNC field offices, it's like going to a funeral home. You go into the Obama field offices, it's like going to the circus or something. It's just much more energy there. But it sort of seems like when they were both there in that county, it sort of neutralized each other to some extent. I mean, do you agree with that conclusion? Otherwise, the interaction term should have favored Obama. Right? That, when he and Romney were there at the same time, he still gained votes, but it only really happened in the counties where he had an office for an office.
I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I mean, one of the problems is we have still terribly few cases where of Romney having an office where Obama didn't have an office. Maybe if we had more of those, we might see more of a Romney effect when he was unopposed. But yeah, it seems like, okay, maybe they are countering each other pretty effectively. And yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation that we saw, Obama had his best effects in places where essentially the other campaign wasn't, or was sort of an unblunted message. Sasha, yeah.
One factual question. When you did the county level analysis, did I know the non-swing state counties where they had offices, the Utahs and the Mississippis?
Yes.
Because, as I understand from my reporting, those were not locally targeted activities. Utah was being used to call them California, or at least in the primary, but used to call other states, and Mississippi made cross-border activity. So it seems like, and you saw a whole lot of Obama offices in upstate New York, and, that were being used. So I'm trying to understand how you account for the county level effects of offices in places where they're not actually trying to recruit local votes.
Yeah, essentially, I was running. This was for all 50 states. I was doing the analysis. I have repeated this analysis just for the identified swing states, and it's essentially the same story. I wanted to include as much data as I could. But yeah, you substantively you're getting the same results. And just because there's actually just not that many cases outside the swing states. I mean, there's only a handful of these offices.
And then more broadly, this seems to operate under the assumption that campaigns want to maximize as many votes as possible. But this isn't profit, right? I mean, rational people don't try to get as many votes as possible. They try to get as many votes as they need to win. Campaigns, more or less forever, have started with vote goals as the first strategic assumption of the campaign. You know, a set raw number of votes that represents somewhere between 50 and 53% of the total votes that the campaign thinks it needs to win based on past analogous elections, and there's a whole lot of sort of art and guesswork that goes into that. And then you start counting votes up based on how many you need to register, how many you need to mobilize, how many you need to persuade. And campaign tacticians tend, when they've counted up to that vote goal, they consider their work done, and then the goal is to use field staff, also paid contact, to monitor through IDs and canvassing those votes to make sure you're not losing them. And then you would allocate other resources, not towards increasing their margin, but expanding the map or putting money into post-election legal, preparations or whatever else your goals are. And one thing that has changed, is that the ability of campaigns to monitor through analytics, and particularly Obama's individual level voter movement through modeling it, has increased significantly, and thus the ability to campaign day to day or week to week to see where they are relative to their vote goals has increased. And so I do wonder whether the measure of sophistication and aggressiveness of campaigns that are doing a good job targeting their mobilization efforts would not manifest itself in indiscriminately increasing their total number of votes, but rather focusing resources most attentively on places where they can hold once they have met their vote goals.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure best way to think about that. I mean, my impression is, obviously just showing up the map. You have a few of these offices in places like California, where they're obviously not concerned about trying to maximize the vote in that state. But when the people show up to volunteer in those places, they're having them call Nevada or some other states. My impression is when they've decided a state is a battleground state, I don't know that there's ever any point where they're just saying, okay, we've got this one, let's move on to something else. I think that, it's within some sort of narrow margin. They're saying we can't take any chances, we need this state, let's focus everything on that.
Any given day, the walk list or the call sheet has a list of names. Now, those could be a list of names you've already identified as your supporters that you call to hold. The goal not being for a net additional vote, or marginal vote. Or you can, depending on where if you go out and you mobilize people who are lower propensity voters, try to expand your universe if you need more votes. But if campaigns aren't, if somebody's running a campaign in Ohio and they get to 2.4 million, vote goal, you wouldn't necessarily use the people who come into your 131 offices to turn that into 2.5 or 2.6. So I'm not convinced that the measure of the ground game is increased vote share, or ought to be seen that way.
Okay.
Let me just quickly respond to that. And I think, so what I hear you saying, Sasha, is that in some sense it's a small effect, as we observed it, or Seth observed it, is all you would expect to see, since no campaign is necessarily trying to get a larger effect. They just want to get enough votes to win. They don't care about getting, a landslide. So that was striking me as a ceiling on what you would expect a field officer to accomplish best deliberate, right?
Right. I mean, these aren't indiscriminate. It's not buying TV where it's indiscriminately persuading everybody in the media market. The idea is you're targeting your efforts on the places where you want to accrue it.
So what you need is, which of course is very difficult to come by, is some measure on the ground in these counties of what's going on in the hearts and minds of all these voters. As you contacted them and recontacted them and recontacted them and monitored them in various ways, have you sort of increased their likelihood of voting from being right on the bubble, then after a couple contacts it was higher, and then you reinforce that over time to the point that they're definitely going to show up basically all we're measuring is whether you voted or not. But you're asking the questions about the underlying likelihood of voting and how
The
field offices.
campaigns know that. They're making
Certainly, the
sure-
Obama campaign ran mobilization experiments, and they measured the propensity. Anytime that they got the greatest impact on increasing individuals' likelihood to vote, at what they assessed as a 45%. So with a 45% turnout score, was like a 3.8% average boost in that housing climate.
But are you wondering then? I mean, I would probably ask you this. So, like, if the if tracking polls show Obama's up by 2 in Colorado, do they switch their strategy if it was at 3 or something like that?
I mean, if we're talking about mobilization, I don't think tracking polls are the sort of currency. They're looking at a raw count, right? And there are 3 ways you count. You come up with a vote goal prediction, and then you basically, the math is more or less like how many votes can I count on being a Democrat running for president in Ohio, and then it is how many more people do I mobilize, and how many more people do I need to persuade to try to get to my vote goals, and if I'm still not there, then how many people are going to need to register to change the electorate. And so, the Obama campaign comes up with a different prescription for each state based on how they will get to their vote goals. And in some states, they see it as like Ohio, they didn't see a whole lot of ability to change the electorate through registration or to significantly increase through mobilization. They saw it as largely a persuasion exercise. In states like Nevada, in North Carolina, they saw it as a registration exercise. But the idea is that you don't, I mean, it's the Joseph Kenny line, right? I'm not going to pay for a landslide. So once you know you have enough votes to win, you pay for other things. So I just don't know why a good campaign would be trying to get as many votes as possible.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think this is really important because I think the tendency for us is always to take data like these and to forget that it's not a randomized experiment, right? And so the first question that I wanted to ask you is if you say to yourself, you're with the Obama campaign, where am I going to put my field offices, right? Like, why do they put 12 field offices in Cuyahoga County or whatever? Because that's where their people are, right? You're going to mobilize people who are going to vote for you, or if it's a state where you feel like it's not a turnout state, it's a persuasion state, then maybe the field offices are in different places. But there's those are not randomly distributed. So if you looked, or have you looked at the placement of these field offices relative to the 08 turnout, I'm sorry, the 08 vote share. So, is it the fact that in Ohio, most of those Obama field offices are in places where he did really well in 08? Or is it where he was razor close, or they went slightly for McCain? That could give us some sense of the decision-making that's going on in each state about where to put the field offices. And then another thing that Sasha's comment made me think of is if the Obama campaign strategy really was an efficiency strategy state by state, we should be able to see that in state offsets. So, if North Carolina is a registration mobilization state, then we should see a huge positive state offset for North Carolina relative to Ohio, which was a persuasion state. And so that those might be interesting to look at. You included dummies as controls, but there might actually be information in there that's interesting vis-a-vis a campaign effect story. And then I was just wondering, Sasha, if you could tell us, did you hear anything at all about them saying that they might have set the vote numbers higher in 08 because they didn't know what kind of a hit you would take for race, but in 2012 they have an estimate of the race effect, so the numbers can actually come down a little bit?
I don't think that. So as I understand it, no, I don't think that they calculate that at the measure of vote goals. They made other adjustments in 08, definitely to their modeling to try to account for underreporting of support based on race. But I mean, the way you basically come up with your vote goals is you look at prior elections and come up with some idea of who's going to, how many people are going to turn out, and then measure, account for population change and whatever else, and then you come up with a very
Just to get to your point on Lynn, that yeah, I mean, I looked at a lot of these variables that trying to predict whether there was basically predict the existence of a field office. Okay, and yes, if Obama did well there previously, it was more likely to build an office there. If it was competitive previously, it was more likely to build an office there. For what it's worth, let's see, I had posted something like this on Facebook a few days ago, and someone, I think it was Brendan, who tweeted back, could we do a matching algorithm on this to try and get around some of the fact that this wasn't a random problem and we can match these counties. I tried that late last night and still got an effect of about half a percentage point. So even if you use all these things to match counties, there does still seem to be some sort of a small effect there. Carolyn.
I wish I had your slides so I could show them to my students. Just a couple of things to think about. One, even if these results are absolutely correct, right as you have, what Sasha is saying is that the interpretation might be different. So instead of the Obama campaign, the field offices were slightly less effective, another interpretation, same result would be that they were being more efficient with their resources in 2012. Their models were getting better, their strategies were getting better. So just it's how you package it in the conclusion, it's not the actual size of the coefficient that went down. Something that just kind of struck me was the idea of a field office as the measure. It didn't tell me how many door knocks. It didn't tell me how many bodies in the field offices. And I don't know how you get that data, but these dots are not the same.
And Seth, that's
Yes.
entirely consistent with your less populated counties results, right? So if every field office, a field office isn't necessarily going to generate a percentage increase in the county vote, right? The better way to think about it, or another way to think about it, might be it's going to each one produces 2,000 new votes. Well, then one of the effects you're going to find is you're going to see larger percentage increases in less populated counties.
Okay.
So one way of thinking about this was, could you interact population or target population with your field offices? Is there some way you could use the data you have? And then just thinking about it, population change over really small coefficients of change, just 2, 10 to 11. I would just go back and do 2,000 to I mean, I tried to get a figure. I was just in Austin. They had 100,000 people in that city in 2017.
Wow. Okay.
It was crazy. So just an idea.
No, that would be good. I mean, we could at least get it with the data we already have. The real tragedy is that it's maybe not a tragedy or an opportunity. The data you were suggesting about door knocks and things like that, it exists. The Obama campaign has this somewhere. It's up to people like Sasha to extract it from them. And but yeah, I think and that is an interesting interpretation from both of you. That the idea that maybe this isn't less of an effect; they're simply getting better at it. They're not bothering to get votes they don't need, and they're just becoming more efficient and harder to know that. But it's yeah.
And then also online with what was suggested earlier, could you subsample to try to deal with some of those imaginary issues, like what you were just talking about, pull out only the swing states, pull out the states where the persuasion was the, continuing goal instead of mobilizing. Somebody who studied direct democracy a long time.
Yeah.
Saved us in ways that. Thank you so much.
No, that's a good idea. Thank you, Hans. Yeah.
Fantastic when I call it. What strikes me here is this obvious kind of lack of effect of the Romney field offices.
Mm.
And this is what makes me question whether or not it's field offices or if there's something else going on here. I mean, are Obama field offices used differently than Romney offices? Are they doing things? I mean, is the Romney office just a presence? Is it generate media contact? Or I guess the question is what's the difference between these two that might drive this effect? Is this just the volume of numbers that people are contacting? Or what?
It's a good question, and we saw it was very much a similar story to what we saw in 2008, where again, not much of an impact of the McCain field offices, and a lot of the anecdotes that John was talking about from people who visited field offices of both parties were the same story. The Obama field offices were incredibly lively, filled with volunteers. They were constantly having people go all over the place. And there were just very few people in the Romney field offices. And they didn't seem to be doing a whole lot, except just one person answering some phones. So that could be a reflection of a few different things. I mean, there just may have been fewer volunteers interested in this sort of thing on the Republican side. It may have been that there were volunteers, but this isn't where they show up. They might do other things. They might work from home. They might be working with local conservative groups and being involved that way. They might just do their activism differently. And that's much harder to get a sense of. I mean, I would actually love to get some evidence from earlier Republican campaigns. I mean, what it looked like, say, in 2004. There were lots of stories of very active Republican groups, but we know that Kerry had a lot of volunteers too. I'm not sure if there was more of a parity that time around. Hopefully, I'll be focusing more on this in 2016 just to get more of a sense of it. But I'm sorry, Sasha, you want to respond?
Broadly, remember, I try to report on this in a scholarly way, understand the difficulty of getting good data on campaign operations. I mean, totally worth noting, though, how incredibly varied field offices are, and how sort of serendipitous the circumstances under which a campaign decides to locate a field office in a given place. Like, is there a storefront with a lease open for the next 111 days? I mean, like, really idiosyncratic local factors, and and still, you still get, why were there 6 different wards in Cleveland that had their own field offices? Like, a lot of it's like some, city council person asks for something and nobody says no to them, and you see field offices that are massive because it's the state party headquarters for Republicans and the Romney campaign's cohabitating there, and then you see, something that used to be a check cashing store that's like, 150 square feet that has a staging area with like 2 card tables out of it. And so, and Democrats definitely are doing mobilization in places that are more dense, and are relying on volunteer base in many places. You talk to Democrat field organizers, when they talk about this, people are taking mass transit or walking to a field office. And so there's a lot of, I think, the spatial aspect of it is not necessarily driven by trying to maximize vote in a given place, but serving the interests of volunteers or local party elites or whatever. And then the other thing, which I think is worth accounting for from 2008, 2012, and onwards to 2016, is how, given the increased ability of people to make phone calls at home without ever getting even call sheets and having to return them to a field office or using mobile canvassing tools, that it's now possible for people, from all active volunteers, to do everything that they would do without ever setting foot in the field office. And I assume that'll become even more so. And so there may be imbalances in terms of where people are networked or people who are self-employed and are on different schedules that determines how much activity there actually is in the site as opposed to as a percentage of like aggregate volunteer activity.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Reflection, I'm remembering there was one very short-lived Obama field office right by the University of Denver campus, and it was located right between a cheesesteak shop and a frozen yogurt shop. I was thinking, yes, the Obama campaign is the nexus between cheesesteaks and froyo. That makes perfect sense. Dave?
Seth, this is sort of building on Sasha's stuff a little bit, that if these things are this, well, I guess particularly in the build-up, but also in some of the analyses, it looks like part of what you're doing is normalizing versus 2008, right? So you're sort of, the question is, what would Obama's vote have been if he hadn't had a field office? And you're using sort of 2008 as the sort of counterfactual, where there were a lot of these places where you had field offices in 2008. And so, that might have been an artificially inflated number in 2008 because of the presence of the field office there. And if these things are really that idiosyncratic, perhaps you can look to sort of see where the locations of the field offices change. So does he put an office in a place where he didn't have one 4 years ago? Now, you might have said that and I was missing it because I was reading John's tweets. But and sort of that, sort of are the, and then places where he had field offices 4 years ago but didn't put them this time, which in part may also give you a sense of the strategy, right? Because we put field offices here, and we learned we didn't really need one there. Right? So comparing the locations of field offices across the 4 years might help a little bit.
That's a very good idea. Some people get very nervous when they give presentations. I really don't, but I just sort of miss that I can't be following tweets while I'm up here. But, I just haven't figured out how to do that yet. But part of the problem is that the data I have from '08 were only for a handful of states, and I wanted to do the whole 50-state thing. When I've done a comparison, when I've included actually the location of Obama field offices from '08 in these equations, the results for this year still hold. But what I should do, I think you're right about the idea of just looking at, just seeing where they did it again and where they tried something new or where they abandoned what they did the previous time. Part of it, the biggest shift is that Obama simply didn't target Indiana and Missouri this time, which was, counts for a big chunk of offices that just weren't there this time around. But at a county by county level, I think that'd be worth looking into. Good tip, thanks. Yes, sir.
A lot of the campaigning by volunteers is toward strangers, either out of the state or even within the state. I read that the Obama campaign was making an effort to have at least some of the people call people they knew, affinity type contacting. Was that the case? And if so, does it make a difference?
So my understanding is that what's considered, I guess, the most effective form of voter contact is if it's someone encouraging you to vote a certain way, and I think someone can be fairly broadly defined. Like if it's someone who lives on your block, even if it's someone you don't know very well, but they say, "Yeah, I'm one of your neighbors," that can be very effective. I don't know the extent to which they were actually doing that sort of thing. I mean, at least as far as like the call list that they were and the address list that they were generating at their offices and handing out to people, and the stuff you would get if you looked on the Obama app on your iPhone and just say, who can I contact in my neighborhood? It didn't seem concerned about whether you knew these people or not. But there may have been, and again, this might be something Sasha knows about, that there may have been efforts to. Yeah. Mm.
But there it is. So it's out of the universe of your friends, but it gets sort of filtered through the campaign's tactical needs, which they had no version of it in '08.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Scott. You had a.
Well, I wanted to go back to something Sasha said and argue against him a little bit, just a tad, which is that the campaigns set these numbers, right? And once they've got there, they want to be efficient and stop using resources, which I've seen in campaigns, and certainly they do that. I think the one thing that makes me still kind of buy the story that Seth is giving us is that there's a lot of uncertainty about whether those numbers are adequate, especially this time versus last time, right? So those targets within counties and things like that, right? So so you think, well, we're probably going to need 3,000 votes from this county. So once we've touched these people 3 times, we're going to change our strategy a little bit. But that is all then contingent on what the other side is doing, how much you trust your operation. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty there that, so campaigns want to be efficient, but they're also very risk averse, right? They don't want to take it for granted. And we even see that in, blowouts. They just don't give up. They run right to the end. And I think that probably tempers that criticism a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I do think the one, I know that the way the Obama campaign through the analytics department monitor individual, I think they have great confidence in that modeling kind of. And I think the difference between doing an analysis of a presidential general election and other races is that electoral college strategy means that there are different ways to spend resources on your next contact. Just moving them among states, aside from everything else, you don't see in any other race. And so
Yeah, I believe that. I guess I'm just a little bit more, you know, so I believe that story 100%. I just think there's probably a little bit more uncertainty, right? So when they're making those choices, they're not doing so in full information, even when they have good data, right? Because I mean, anybody that's knocked on doors knows that, you know, no matter how many times you trust, I don't trust them to tell me the truth, you know. And you know, and I wonder how that, you know, especially in the battleground states, right, and on the ground in the counties where, you know, it's very competitive, that uncertainty probably, to some degree, mutes the efficiency, or makes you go, well, we've reached our target, but, you know, we're not 100% sure that we've got it right, because the other side's here working hard too. We're seeing things on the ground that, you know, make us worry more. Maybe we didn't plan right the first time. And even with the confidence there, you know, I think sometimes, at least when, and this is all local stuff, but even when you're confident, you're not confident at some level. You know, so if you have a more dire need, then yes, you move those resources very quickly. But if you're still uncertain, you know, there's some pressure to keep things there, I would assume.
Joanne?
I think to add to that, there are a variety of things they could be doing with field office, whether it's, you know, charting your voters. When they get to their count, you know, they're not closing up that field office, because there would be sort of PR issues with shutting down field offices and then steering an open office, closing up shop here or there. So those field offices are staying active throughout the rest of that season, even if they think they've hit their target. So the question is, what are they doing? Right? And are they moving those resources elsewhere? Are they having callers in that call center now call a different state? But one of the other things that they're doing, I presume, is also gathering new data to add to their information for next year. So they're potentially contacting maybe people outreach that they wouldn't have contacted if they're focusing just on their targets. But their data gathering, identifying new things about potentially new voters for the future that can be used, I would guess, for future campaigns.
I don't know of a candidate campaign that is thinking about anything
Other than
vote
that
share
election,
on
sure, right.
November. And,
But they're doing something.
and I think that they're acutely aware of the risks of contacting people outside the universe, of mobilizing advertising supporters, or of trying to use volunteers for persuasion to walk people.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, it's not, I don't want to pretend that because they have data that we don't know everything is brilliant, but they are making a series of rational decisions about how to maximize their field resources based on data that they have. And I think that they are, certainly in the case of the Obama campaign, were very well targeted and rigorous about how they allocated their resources down to the individual level. So I think that we should assume that the places that they were allocating resources were the places where they thought that was and the necessary, and the outcomes are strategic necessary.
And these are, with Joanne's point, I'm sure at least in the moment, you know, the campaigns are very much fixated on that particular race. So, but I do know after 2008, you know, there were all these former Obama offices lying around in Colorado, and many of those exact same addresses had Bennett for Senate offices two years later. Just very conveniently, they happened to crop up, and you know, and Michael Bennett is, of course, kind of the darling of the Obama administration for whatever. So there's, and some of those offices end up becoming the same ones for 12. So there are these ties from year to year, which I haven't really examined heavily. But, you know, there is some story that maybe they are fishing for the future, that this is not a completely ephemeral organization, that they're actually building something. But I don't know how much of that they're actually considering in the moment. Yeah. Yeah.
On Iowa and Steve Dvorsky, who was the chair of the Democratic Party, and the number of door knocks in the state was like 8, 6, or maybe 17. And if you throw out the babies, like, you know, who can go to the children, how actually they almost, you know, hit something. Is that number available
You get it to me, I'll interact it. That's yeah.
But I have, one other thing just to think about as other controls that might make you tighter is, are you controlling for the ad buy spending for each county? Because that's in the Washington Post, and if you look at that map, it looks just like this. But it might be good to suck up that variation, which is, obviously another form.
No, I was just talking with Lynn about this morning, and apparently, so we could combine this, and that would be good to do, but haven't done it yet. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut things off, but we do have another little scheduled break here. Thank you once again, Seth.
Thank you.